Wow.
Well, Dusty, this is a pretty special interview for us. We've talked about this for a long time.
Well, I'm thrilled. But I loved last week or the last couple of weeks when you got this all set up, because I know this is one of your dear friends. And for so many of our listeners, they are going to be so familiar with him, his voice, and just the legend he is. So I'm thrilled. I almost said I grew up watching him on TV, but I did. But I didn't really grow up. I just thought I was growing up. But I used to watch the Statler Brothers all the time, and so to be with Jimmy Fortune and Dave Clark is an honor. So it's very cool, very cool.
Well, it's an honor for me, you guys. I appreciate it, Dusty and Dave. You know, I have to pinch myself sometimes when I look back at my life and see how God has just has intervened in times when I wasn't even living my life for Him, and I look back at all of it and I see so many God things. Yeah. And being Dave's neighbor, Dave and his wife Cindy, and his family growing. I've lived here in this house for 21 years, longer than I've lived anywhere.
Wow.
And when we came here after the Statler Brothers retired, I know beyond a shadow of a doubt that God brought us here.
And Dave, did you guys live here when they?
Oh yeah.
Did you realize who it was when he moved? I want to hear that story.
We have a little creek, and we'll talk about COVID Bridge at some point during this conversation. But we had a creek, and it was grown up, 20 foot high of trees and weeds.
I couldn't even see his house.
Yeah.
Wow.
And there was an engineer that worked at the studio at my house, and he came home one day, and he had worked a session in Franklin. He said, "Hey, do you know who your neighbor is?" I said, "No, I know they sold the house a few months ago, but we couldn't see it because of trees." And he said, "It's Jimmy Fortune." And I went, "No," because I'm a big Statler fan.
I know.
And then we ended up meeting, and I think when I met you, there were a couple different times we kind of met, said hello, but one time you were at National Quartet Convention, and I walked up to you and Nina were sitting in the back of the room. You were going to sing, and I said, "It's good to see you, but this is the first time I've seen you with a shirt on, because I'd always see you out mowing the lawn."
That is funny.
I would look over and see Dave over there mowing his lawn, and it was he would mow his lawn right down to the dirt, and it would be dust. I'd see his head poking out every once in a while of the dust and everything. We'd wave, and like that, and I didn't know who he was at the time either. But of course, it didn't take too long to learn. About his accomplishments in life as
he's
well.
He's a little part-time writer.
My God!
But it has been a very special friendship.
That's very cool. Yeah.
And there were probably three people that I have gone the deepest for the most amount of years, and one was Brian Spear, who we interviewed a few weeks ago about the Spear family, and the other was Larnell Harris, who we interviewed a while back. And then this one we've been talking about. And every time I'd say, "Jimmy, come be on the podcast," and he'd say, "Just tell me when."
Yeah.
And there's a rightness to all the timing. And today we're sitting here in the room, and if people are following your stuff, everybody's familiar with the Jimmy Jams.
Right. This is where they took place at, right in this room right here.
That is so cool.
Did you watch any of those?
I did. Yes, I didn't.
Tell the story behind how that began to happen.
I'd forgotten about that.
Well, of course, when COVID happened, I was sitting around the house here, and Nina was saying, "Man, people are really wanting to know how we are and what's going on." Yeah. And I just said, "You know what? I need to just get on Facebook or whatever and talk to people every day, just to give them some kind of positive message or something, maybe sing a song." Yeah. And so I started doing it, and I would put one song on, and I would talk to them and say, "Hey, we're going to get through this," or give them some kind of positiveness. And sometimes when people would pass away, I'd try to pay tribute to them and do a song for them, and people just appreciated it so much. And now that was up in my little room upstairs, my little music room, I call it. I would record those, but then we had some of our friends that we were really close with. like Mike Rogers, Ben Isaacs, and Janae Flainer, and some others. We would gather in this room right here and actually, just jam and play music and just kind of send some positiveness out in the world that was a dark place there for a little while.
It was so needed.
And even though it was bad in a lot of ways, but it was good in a lot of ways, that it brought a lot of people together.
It did.
All of a sudden, we had time to sit down and talk to each other and enjoy each other. Although there were people that we couldn't connect with, but the thing of it was, I needed to make that connection with those fans. They had so much feedback.
Yes.
Coming back, oh, thank you so much, and it was like unreal the response that we were getting from it. And it helped me to survive that moment in time. But what it also made me realize was that physical connection with those people I was missing that.
Yeah. Boy, that's
and we don't realize how important those fans are to us until it's like we don't know what you got until it's gone. It's true in life with friends and the fans that are out there that come to see us, and I go out after every show and sign autographs and talk to people and have that physical connection with them. I love it. And that has done more for me than anything. And when I didn't have it, man, I just realized that was, to me, the connection from me to the good Lord above, those people, and the communication with all three of those things that take place.
But there were people who, I mean, they couldn't get out of their houses either.
No.
And if you didn't post it at a certain time, they were wondering where it was.
Where it was at,
right.
I remember that.
And if I remember right, one of the largest downloads of those was the day that Harold Reed passed away.
Yeah, that was a tough time, because we went up when Harold passed away. Man, I just couldn't believe it. But we knew that when we went up there, we were told that, hey, we can go to the funeral, but we're going to have to keep our distance. And I remember looking over at Don, and Don's got his mask on, and I'm sitting over with mine. Phil's over there, and we waved at each other at his funeral. We just waved at each other. Gosh. And we were like, we couldn't have
all those years
that
together,
hug and that it was so sad. But man, just a time, and I'm sure everybody's, like I said, our children and some of our grandchildren will never forget.
Same here.
How it was, and I hope that, pray to God that it never happens again. But we've had people come here to this house, and we needed that connection. This place holds a special place in our heart.
You walk in, it feels really good. It feels real. It feels real peaceful.
There were some other connections during COVID that weren't quite so positive. Right at this table, you and I were sitting talking, as we did we spent a lot of time together during that because it was next door. And we'd sit and talk, and one day, Dusty, right where you're sitting, Jimmy was sitting right there, and he's talking, he's
coughing,
and then and it was about 3 days later
he texted
me, and Nina called, I think, and said, "Hey, we got some bad news. Jimmy's got COVID," and I was out walking that morning, and I just remember thinking, "Yep." I'm about 3 days behind him, and
sure enough, and then Dave did get it, and he came over to check on me. And man, I was feeling pretty bad. I was trying to get over it, and I was doing okay, but then it was one day we called over there, and Dave wouldn't answer the phone one morning. I was like, "Uh-oh,
he's gone."
You were calling every day, and because Jimmy's nature is he felt so bad, and I'd rather be the one to get it than to give it to somebody. I think he had gotten it from Mike Rogers, if I remember right. Y'all were at a big party together, and a lot of the music industry was there. And so Mike got it, and Jimmy would call every morning and say, "You doing all right? Anything I can do for you?" He felt bad, and nothing I could do. But every morning I'd say, I'm doing great. I'm doing great.
Yeah.
But the fever was getting higher by the day, and I wasn't going to tell him.
Yeah.
I had breakfast. It almost feels like this could have been Isaacs. I had breakfast with Ben Isaacs, probably right around the same time, and he got it. And about 2 days later, Ed called me and said, "Hey, Ben wants to know how you're feeling." I said, "I'm doing good." He said, well, guess what? You probably want to go get tested. Ed made me leave the office and go test it because Ben got it, Sonia got it, Becky got it.
It was really weird because it was a matter of time.
Yeah.
I was around people, at certain times, a few people, and never got it.
Yeah.
And it was weird. I went and I got my first shot. And I got it a week later, and I had it.
I never got it that I know of.
Yeah.
Well, there's still time.
No, I don't want to get it.
No, you're sitting in a good place right there, buddy.
Watch. This will be
he took me to the hospital. It was
man.
that one morning.
I called over there one morning to check on him. He did not answer the phone. And I went over there, and I was knocking on the door, and I was looking in the window. I said, I don't see him. So we were so worried. I came back, and I called Cindy. We called Cindy and said, "Hey, we can't get in there." And she said, "Well, I'll be home in just a few minutes."
Yeah.
She left and she came home and got in, and we found him almost unresponsive in his bedroom, and he was, when I opened the door and walked in, I could hear him moaning in the back room back there, and I got him in my expedition that I had at the time, and he couldn't even sit in the seat. So he crawled in and laid in the floorboard, and I took him to the hospital, and he was in rough shape, man. And we prayed hard, boy. We prayed hard.
Wow.
And Ben Isaacs, one of the funny stories that came out of that, Ben was in the studio with who's the actor that just did Reagan
Dennis Quaid.
Dennis Quaid, yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So Ben called and said, "Hey, I was in the studio with Dennis today, and just want you to know he was on his knees praying for you."
And Dennis Quaid's praying for you.
And so my kids thought that was a big deal.
That is a big deal.
It is.
But growing up, such a fan of the music, I can literally remember where I was when I heard about this new guy replacing Lou DeWitt with the Statler Brothers. Yeah. And
that was a strange time in my life. But the Statler Brothers, when I think back on it, they literally saved my life. Yeah. I was in a place in my life where I was struggling in so many ways. I was working 2 daytime jobs. I played music 6 nights a week, 4 hours a night. Would have off Sunday basically, and I started all over again, week after week after week for a lot of years. And for me to get a call out of the blue from the most awarded actor in the history of country music to say, "Hey," and this is a long story short, but we want you to come over and we want to talk. And I didn't know what it was about. I didn't know that Lou DeWitt had suffered from Crohn's disease, and that I had met him a couple months before that, and around Thanksgiving 1981. Had no idea, and he heard me sing, and we met each other, and I thought I'd never hear from him again. And so I get a call like out of the blue to come over and talk to him because he was going to have to be out for surgery. And so they said, "Can you come over and talk to us?" And my good friend Billy James up home, he played bass for the Statler Brothers at the time, and he was a big fan of mine as well, would come around and hear us. And he happened to know somebody that had my number and called me up and said, "Hey, come over." And I went over and auditioned. I was the first one there, but I was suffering from laryngitis and kind of had worked myself into I was anemic and was really, really, really physically down in my life. Physically, emotionally, spiritually, everything. And so anyway, they talked to me and wound up coming to Nashville to audition 26 more other people, I think. And then they came back to me and wound up hiring me temporarily. And Lou was going to come back in about 6 months. And I had no idea because I never wanted to be that person to come in and I never wanted to be the person to take someone's place in a group. It's always ends in disaster. Yeah, and I knew in the back of my mind, but I said, it's not the same. I'm helping them out.
I'm helping. Right. Yeah.
And at the time, while I was with them, I had a couple of offers, to sit down and talk with a couple of people. Was a guy named Frank Leffel at the Mercury Studios, and a guy named Jim Folsong that worked at Capitol Records. Yeah. And they had kind of made contact with me and said, "Hey, what are you going to do after the Statler Brothers are finished with you?" And I said, "I don't know," but I said, as long as they need me, I'm gonna be there for them, because I felt like I really owed those guys something, But I also knew that once Lou came back, I said, maybe, who knows what might happen, But I had no idea that Lou was going to come back and say, hey, he came back and was here back for about a week with the group. And I had no idea he was going to come to me and say, hey, look, I don't think I can do this anymore. He said, why don't you've done a good job to this point. He said, you could be a full-time Statler Brother. I already talked to the other guys about it. If it's what you want, and that's what. And so I said, I'd be really a fool to turn this down. And I said, as long as they want me, I said, if you're sure that's what you want, because I never wanted to be that guy to come in and take somebody's place. So I said, I tell you what, I'm going to make a place for myself. I'm not going to take your place. You will always be the number one tenor for the Statler Brothers. I will never take your place. Good. I said, I'll make a place for myself.
Yeah.
And that's the way I approached it. Yeah. Because I knew once that was said and the people found out about it, because there were people that would come through the line, autograph line, we were autographing at the time, and they would pull their pen and paper back and walk around me and go to the other guys. And I would say, and I'd say, hey, I understand. Sure. I understand.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't want to be that guy that's going to do that. But I'm just going to do the best I can to try to help the Statler Brothers get back to where we were and to keep this thing going. And that's all I wanted to do. And so I wanted to, I thought about it. I said, there's times when we have opportunities in our life that come along. And for some reason, I had that same feeling that God had his hand in this. It was bigger than me. It was bigger than me. Yeah. And I knew that it was, I was where I was supposed to be at the time.
That's a good feeling.
And I can remember, I think I've told Dave this before in interviews and things, when I was a kid, as a little boy, I can remember some of my first memories. I remember finding a bird in the yard, a dead bird, and I just felt this. I picked it up in my hand, and I'm like, oh my gosh! I looked up as he was flying in the sky, and now he's laying here in my hand. And he's dead. And I went over and I found my two sisters, Linda and Brenda. They were twin sisters of mine, and I said, I was crying, and they said, well, let's go have a burial for him. And so we went and got under this tree, and we dug a little hole, and we put him in it, and we buried him, and we sat there and we prayed. And I felt this presence that I still have to this day. It was a presence of just this something a whole lot bigger than me. Wow. A whole lot bigger than.
That's awesome.
And I just figured it's the presence of the God Spirit, and it's always been there.
Yeah.
And even through some times that I strayed away from God,
in spite of you,
in spite of me, I felt this presence.
I believe that.
Sorry.
Go ahead. I felt that. I felt that in moments like that in my life.
Yeah.
And I felt like this is bigger than me. Whatever reason God has me here, I have to do the best I can do for this moment and be ready for it.
Yeah.
Even though physically was in rough shape, but I remember going home to my mom and telling my mom I had. It was a Thanksgiving 1981. I had met Lou DeWitt the night before, and at a ski resort in Virginia. And I walked in. I knew Mom was going to have a good meal, and I made my way up there. I was like the first one at home. Out of the 9 kids, I was the first one there. I walked in, and I was sick. I probably weighed 120 pounds, soaking wet.
You probably still do.
Yeah, well, not
I'm
much
just
fun.
joking.
But I walked through the door and she said, "Oh my God, Jimmy," she said, "you look terrible. What's wrong?" And I said, "Mom, I'm just been working a lot." And I told her, I said, "But Mom, I feel like something good's going to happen to me. I don't know what it is. I don't know why I told her that. I just wanted to make her feel better about it." But she walked over and put her hands on my shoulders and sang, "It's no secret what God can do." And when she started singing, I remember sitting there and the tears were coming down my face, and to hear Mama's voice singing over me like that, and realizing that
it was bigger than you.
It was so much bigger than me, and it still is today. I mean, whatever's happening in my life, I just can't get over it. That
you talked about the night that you met Lou. It was the night before that Thanksgiving, and it was at Wintergreen,
Virginia, ski resort there.
Ski resort.
I had a call. I had a
You
night
had a day off.
A day off, and I had Thanksgiving day off. That I hadn't had a day off in a long time, and I remember my friends calling me up and saying, "Hey, we're going to go up to Wintergreen and we're going to have a little jam tonight. Why don't you come?" and the girl I was dating at the time, which I wound up marrying later on, she said, "Surely you're not going to go play music tonight." And I was like,
she didn't know you at all.
I was like, "Yeah,
I love it.
I'm going."
I love it.
And I did, and I'm like, but again, that was a God thing. I sang that night, and Lou heard me sing. I sang with him a couple songs, and he came up. He just was so nice and just very, just complimentary of me and everything. And I had no idea what it was going to lead to.
Yeah.
And he remembered you.
Yeah.
So when he was getting sick and they were looking, he was the one that gave him your name.
He told them about me, yeah.
And I've always wondered, and I don't know that anybody knows the answer, but I always wondered if the fact that he was there that night, he knew that he was sick already.
Oh, he knew that, yeah. He'd been sick.
But I wondered if he was there looking for a replacement. I don't know. I've never heard that piece of the story.
I knew that he had someone else in mind, too. And there was a good friend of his that was a really good singer. And I knew that he was already thinking about some things.
Had you seen the Statler Brothers with him at that point? Had you seen them live and everything?
No, I just only saw him on TV or only heard him on radio. That was it. And I always, when I hear him, I would always sing his part with him. I knew.
So he had that already.
I knew that it was just kind of weird when I'd hear him come on the radio and I'd sing right along with him. And
you said that Lou came back for a week or so. In that week that he came back, do I remember right that you guys, the Statlers, filmed an episode of Hee Haw? And so they didn't want to get rid of you.
No, they wanted to keep me.
So they put you on guitar.
They put me on guitar, yeah.
So there's an episode of Hee Haw somewhere.
I probably saw it. I was a huge Hee Haw.
Where you're playing guitar and Lou's singing, and that's the only time that was ever captured, if I remember right.
And there was only one video that's probably ever been done where I'm singing. There was their single out at the time was called Whatever.
Yeah.
And so I'm singing to Lou's voice in the video. And I'm not.
That's funny.
It's not me. It's not my voice. It's Lou's voice.
Oh, I'm gonna. Yeah.
And if you know to look for that.
Yeah.
And if you don't, you don't even think about it.
And
I've seen that video.
And it really looks like I'm singing it.
Yeah.
Because I'm on his voice.
But it doesn't sound like.
But
you're
it doesn't.
singing.
It sound. You can tell it's Lou when you hear it.
Okay, I'm gonna look.
But a lot of people never knew the difference in that.
Whatever.
Yeah. Whatever.
Yeah.
But I thought that was kind of neat, and also they had they didn't know, they knew I was temporary, so they took some of those suits that they used to have. They had them made. Harold would design them, and they had a tailor that Joe Pehan up in Virginia and Stanton that would make those suits. They were real elaborate suits. They were going to retire some of them anyway, so they took some of them of Lou's and had them cut down for me. And so it was like Lou was like 6 foot something, and plus he probably weighed, I don't know, 200 and something.
Yeah,
maybe.
he wasn't heavy.
No, he wasn't heavy, but he was a big guy.
Yeah.
And so they cut him down for me. We're like
pockets
like,
were around front,
and I was like 26 in the waist, and And so the pockets were were cut down, and I was a lot shorter, so you could put my hands in the pocket. I didn't have enough room to put them. And the pockets in the back of the pants.
They probably joined together.
They met straight across like that.
That is so funny.
Yeah, and so, but I was proud to wear them, boy.
You were a part of the Statler
I said, the
Brothers.
worst y'all got to offer is the best I ever had, boys.
That's
Give it to me,
so
son.
And there were things. There's a story about Mylon Lefevre. That story is something like when he wrote Without Him, he showed up at a car dealership with a sack full of cash and bought like a real nice Mercedes or whatever the nice car was. And when he walked in, they wanted to buy a nice car, and they kind of looked at him like, yeah, right. And he opens up this sack of cash from his first royalty statement. And there's a similar story about Jimmy Fortune, right?
Oh, yeah.
When you got the job.
Yeah, because they hired me, and then I had this little MG, and that's all I had. And I had everything I owned I could put in the seat next to me in an MG. After they hired me, there was this real estate guy named Kendall Bennett up home, and him and I became really, really good friends. And he was one of the Statler Brothers' right-hand men. He kind of took care of things and all this stuff. He said, you go get your stuff together. He said, I'm going to find you a house over here. You move you in there, and you can just live there. And, while you're with us, getting things settled. And maybe you can buy a house or something later on. I said, okay. So I go and I get everything together, and I had everything in my MG. So when I say, I never had a new car. So I'm like, I got cut off shorts, no shirt, and no shoes. I'm driving over to Stanton, where the Statler Brothers are, and I pull into the first car dealership I come to. It's called Horner Wheels, and I pull in there, and I get out of the car, and I'm walking around on the lot, and this guy comes out and said, so, yes, sir, can we help you? I said, yeah, I'm kind of looking at it. I might buy a new car. I don't know. He's like, yeah, okay. He said, meanwhile, this guy told me later on that they were all watching out there like, what's this guy, And so I said, he said, so what are you looking for? And I told him, and I said, I just got the job with the Statler Brothers. I've been hired by the Statler Brothers. And he said, oh, you did, huh? And he's kind of like chuckling. So I look at a car and everything, and I just look at a few of them, and I didn't buy anything at that moment right there. But anyway, he said, I got to know him like years later, and I bought a lot of cars off of him. But he told me this story about he walked back in and said, yeah, this guy says Statler Brothers hired him to come over here, and they were all laughing like, yeah, they're right, they didn't believe it. Well, then I did come back and buy a car, and they were like, oh, they were surprised then.
The first of many cars you bought from that guy.
I forget how many cars I bought.
And do you remember what they called the cars, or you called them, or something? Wheels of Fortune.
Yeah.
Okay, that's funny. That is funny.
I need my own dealership.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
I was car stupid. I was a redneck rich, I guess you might say. Well, I was redneck rich.
I gotta say, I've lived next to you for 22 years, and people will go, "Well, is Jimmy home this week?" And I'll look out, and I can see out my kitchen, your driveway. I don't know if you're here or not because I can't keep up with the different cars you're in.
Yeah, that's true. But
that's fun.
I was always dealing with cars and stuff. That's right. I worked with cars and stuff before the Statler Brothers hired me. I worked at Berlin Porsche Audi in Charlottesville, and we sold cars, worked on cars and things like that. But I never could afford one. It was always I drove $200 beaters, and I would drive them until they just broke down on the side of the road, and I'd leave them sitting and walk off and leave them.
So Jimmy was a service writer, is that correct?
A service writer.
Which meant when you take your car in, they analyze it. And there's one story somewhere I remember hearing about you trying to fix somebody's car. Mm-hmm. You got out under the dash or something and didn't know what you were doing.
No, it was what it was. He hired me as a service writer. And so I didn't know anything about it. The guy was just kind of doing me a favor. But there were a couple of good service writers, and I was not. I was learning. So they told me,
as a service writer who's a great tenor singer.
As a service writer, I go in there and I'm saying, okay. I started booking. booking the people that come in by what they say that this job will take 3 hours or 4 hours, or this job is blah blah blah, and so I'm booking them, and I wind up booking a lot of people. I couldn't say no to anybody. They'd come in, oh yeah, we can do that, and I would just write it down, and next thing you know, the guys are coming to me going, "What are you doing to us, man? You're gonna," and the other service writers are like, "Jimmy, come on, man." They were so mad at me, and so whenever one would come in, I would say, "Well, they don't have time to work on, so I'm going to work on it myself." There was a 911 Porsche. This guy comes in and he needs an ignition. He was so nice and everything, and he needed a new ignition switch in a 911 Porsche. And I'm like, so I go and I said, "Where's the part?" I go get the part, and I said, "I can do it myself." I'm out there underneath. I'm upside down underneath that thing. And you ever try to get back in a dash of a 911 Porsche, put in and I didn't know nothing. And I was out there all day trying to work on that thing. And I like to never got it in there. Finally, I think it took me all day, but I would go running back in and trying to come back out. And then I was working on other people's cars trying to say, and I didn't know anything about it. But the mechanic did. And then finally I got it down to where I would talk to the mechanics, okay, what do I do here to get this? And well, I can do this job in such and such time, and then you can, so I had to wind up getting with them and learning how to do it. But I know that the owner of Berlin Porsche Audi was named Ed Berlin. I know he was happy when the Statler Brothers hired me and said,
when Harold called you, were at work.
Yeah, I was at work.
And you asked that guy.
And I went to him, and I said, the Statler Brothers want me to come in Nashville. And I said, can I? He said, get out of here. Go now. Do not hesitate. Get out of here, Jimmy.
So funny. That is so,
he was happy to get rid of me, but they were good people, and they tried to give me a chance.
So I want to get past the Statlers a little bit in a minute and talk about what's happened since then, because your story just keeps getting better. But there's one story that you got to share, and I probably know more stories about you than I should.
Oh yeah.
But there's a story that happened at a Nancy Reagan gala in Hollywood when you were new with the Statlers. Do you mind sharing that?
Oh yeah, we were out there, and it was a birthday party for her.
This is awesome.
And we were out there, and everybody in Hollywood was there. Everybody, every actor, every actress, everybody who was anybody was there that night. And I've always been a big Jimmy Stewart fan. I love Jimmy Stewart, and one of my favorites. Shenandoah was one of my favorite movies that he was in, and so many were there. Burt Reynolds and Lonnie Anderson, and they were all, coming up talking to the Statler Brothers. And I was always kind of standing in the background like, man, what in the world am I doing here? How did I get here? And I just felt so out of place, I guess you might say. And we were sitting at the table with President Reagan, Nancy Reagan, and a bunch of others. And I'm looking around me, and I could see Jimmy Stewart sitting over there, and Frank Sinatra and all of them, and I'm like, man, I really want to say something to them, but but Harold and them were like, hey, we got to be calm and stay in our place and all this stuff. I said, okay, all right. And so I said, okay, I'm not going to say anything. I'm just going to sit here. And we were going to perform that night, and so I had to go to the bathroom, and I'm like, okay, so I told him, I said, I got to go to the bathroom, guys. I said, okay. So I get up, and I'm going to find a bathroom, and I'm standing in there. I'm using the bathroom, and I look to the side right of me, and then Frank Sinatra comes over, and he's standing in the urinal next to me. And I'm like, oh, my gosh, Frank Sinatra, and I'm like, and so he looks at me. He looks right at me and says, well, Jim, what do you think about this stuff that's going on here tonight?
No.
And I'm like, Frank Sinatra, I'm getting ready to open my mouth. I'm like, how do you know me? And I hear this voice on the other side of me. It's Jimmy Stewart.
No.
And he says, yeah, there's a lot of stuff going on out there. He said, I don't know, blah, 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 this. And I'm shaking in my shoes like that, but I'm like, oh, my God. And so I go over there and stand, and I'm just kind of waiting. They come walking over, and I said, Mr. Stewart, I'm never going to get this chance again. I said, if you don't mind, I would I just got to tell you, I'm your biggest fan. I love you. I love what you do, and I just can't help it. I just love to shake your hand." And he said, "Son, have you washed that hand yet?" He said, "If you don't mind, if you wash it," he said, "then I'll shake your hand." And I was washing my hand like this, and I was shaking hands. I said, "Mr. Sinatra, you too, buddy. I'm just so happy to meet you." And I'm standing there looking like this, and they walk out talking, and I'm standing there with my mouth open like, and I look in the mirror, and I'm saying, "Do you believe that?"
That's
one of the all-time classic stories.
That's amazing.
So
amazing.
I go back, and I couldn't even. I was so excited. I didn't even tell the guys about it. I just I just can't believe that I met.
But
in the course of those years, I've seen pictures of you with President Bush, President Reagan. I've seen there were stories about you going to Gene Autry's house and playing the guitar that you had seen him use in the movies as a kid.
Yeah, that was an old D45 that he played. And I was such a guitar fan anyway.
Yeah.
But Gene Autry, Daddy and us used to watch the movies, and stuff, and I never dreamed that I would meet somebody like that. And he was so nice to us because the Statlers were big Western buff, movies, and they knew everything. They knew everybody that played in everything. They knew their birth dates. They knew everything about them, and they were just big, fans and friends with them, actually.
Yeah.
And we had Gene Autry on our TV show special, and so when we went out there to film his
Did
part.
you film in California?
Yeah, we went there to film it, and. So while we were there, he says, "Man, why don't y'all just come to my house?" He said, "I want to show you all around." And so we go in this like an 11-acre estate right in the middle of L.A. and a mansion, and he takes us in and he's showing us around, and not only just he takes us in the bathrooms and the closets and showing us all. I'm sitting here going, "What in the world? He's the nicest guy you would ever want to meet." And we go in this one room, and he's got the piano, his music room, and he's got the guitars. And this one guitar, it was a D45 that I saw, and I knew he played it in some movies. And he said, "I see you eyeing that guitar, son." I said, "Yes, sir." I said, you played that in some of the movies?" And he said, "Yeah." He said, "Go on over and grab it and play it if you want to." And I go over there and I pick it up, and the strings are so rusty on it, man. You couldn't hardly tune it. I'm like,
there's another great story about him, if I remember right, that he owned the California Angels baseball team.
Yeah. So he said, "Why don't y'all come to the Angels to the ball game tonight with me? Sit in my press box and whatever and all that." So we go, and of course, with my daddy watching TV and watching those old movies when I was young, and Daddy being such a big fan of them. Of course, you didn't have a phone; you couldn't call anybody back then.
Yeah.
And I remember Green Acres was one of my favorite shows too. I used to watch Green Acres and all. And Pat Buttram, anyway, he was
Mr. Haney.
Mr. Haney was his sidekick in a lot of those Western movies. And we're in there, and they got all the food and everything out, and I'm sitting there with Harold, Phil, and Don and Gene Autry, and here comes Pat Buttram in, and he sits down like right beside me.
Oh, my
and I'm
God.
sitting there, "Mr. Haney, that's Mr. Haney." I'm like, "Oh my gosh." And I'm hearing them talk, and they're telling stories back and forth, and I'm sitting in the middle of them going, like, I couldn't believe I was there, I don't even know what to say to these people, because all I could say was, I love you guys. I'm a fan. I've watched everything, and I don't even know why I'm sitting here. I don't know how I got here.
I love that.
And all I could do was just have that moment and just say, "Hey, I got to tuck this away in my memory." And share it with my children one day.
Yep.
But we talked about back in that day, there weren't cell phones you could capture all that.
No, you couldn't.
And there were moments like that. There's a great moment of the Statler singing the song you wrote, Elizabeth, to Elizabeth Taylor on the movie set.
Oh my God!
There were so many of those kind of things. One of my favorite was. It seems like Glen Campbell, maybe you were on his show or he was on Statler's show, and you were out before the show just kind of playing guitar, and you heard somebody playing behind you.
Yeah, we were out in we went out to L.A. again and to do his show out there, and and I'm big Glen Campbell fan because it was one of the first records my daddy bought brought home when he got a record player and brought it home when I was about, I don't know, 13, 14 years old. He brought a Glen Campbell record and a Charlie Pride record.
Wow.
And brought it home for me to listen to.
Yeah.
And I learned more Charlie Pride records than I did his because I couldn't play his stuff because it was so complicated. I just couldn't play that well. I was okay, but it just wasn't that great. But I just loved him.
Yeah.
Big fan. And so we're out there and doing his show, and we're going to do Flowers on the Wall with him. And so I'm up there just tuning my guitar and playing a little bit. And he walks up, and I hear the guitar playing, and he starts playing, and while I'm playing along, and then I hear another guitar. Here comes Jerry Reed's out there. He comes up and starts playing. I'm like standing between him and Jerry Reed, and I just set my guitar down, and I'm sitting there just listening to both them just go back and forth jamming. I couldn't believe it. And I mean, but there was just things like that God allowed me to be in a situation where how did I get here? Yeah. And because I couldn't play guitar like they could. I couldn't do things like that. And it was just like when I met people like Chet Atkins and Chet Atkins was on our TV show, and he was walking by my dressing room one day, and I'm in there playing my guitar, and he walks in, and he's sitting there, and he just looks at me, and he said, I like your playing, son. That just floored me right there, and I said, well, listen, I said, while you're here, I said, give me some advice.
Yeah.
Tell me some, and he said, well, he said, I watch you play. I played some things. He said, you play pretty well for somebody that does a lot of things wrong. And I thought, he said, well, I don't mean, and I was like, okay. I said, I appreciate your honesty. And he said, no, I don't mean it in a bad way. He said, but you have to learn things. He said, obviously, you learn from the way you grew up. And I said, I picked up a lot of bad habits. He said, yeah, I can see that. But he said, you have to practice. He said, it's easier to do it right than it is to do it wrong. And I always remember that. I said, okay, easier to do it right than it is to do it wrong. He said, because when you do things the right way, he said, it's easier. Everything flows. He said, when you do things the wrong way, you're trying to compensate for the things that you don't know, the things that you don't learn. Yeah. And he said, some of the best advice you could ever give anybody. And he said, when you practice, you don't practice till you get it right. You practice till you can't get it wrong.
Wow.
And he said, that's what you do. And so I kind of, and then I'm sitting there playing. He starts walking out, and he said, but then again, I didn't write Elizabeth either. So, and he said that.
Okay.
He said that to me. Yeah.
That is so cool.
And so things like that. Yeah. And I also asked Glen Campbell when I was out there. I said, "How did you get so good?"
Yeah.
I mean, my gosh. I said, because you don't. I said, do you ever had any vocal difficulties? Yeah. She said, no.
No,
he said, I don't. And then he said, I said, well, what about a guitar? He said, as far back as I can remember, he said, I went to bed with a guitar in my hand, and I woke up with one in my hand.
Wow. Wow.
That's how I got it. He said, I pretty much gave my life to music. Yeah.
So, we could talk for another 3 hours about just famous people you met. And I got to say this, Dusty, having lived next door to him for 20 years, the way you describe feeling around those people, I feel like living next door because I was such a fan of the Statlers, and the people that you parade in and out of the house on a normal basis are people that I just exactly the way you're describing about meeting Glen Campbell.
Yeah.
Well, it was last week with these awards.
Which he won,
which was incredible. there was a backstage area, and it was, I mean, there was, to me, there was a lot of A artists. There was, the Isaacs. You had a lot, had Karen, for the genre of music.
Yeah.
But I'm not joking, I have not even talked to him about this. When Jimmy walked in, you saw the people swarm to Jimmy, which, first of all, his personality. I mean, just he was so kind and talking to the people and just being there, and you thought that to me,
it's a different level.
It's a different level of what, and that's nothing against the people that I work with daily, but it was so cool to watch him talk to the different artists and the different people, and just.
And when I say a different level, I'm not even talking about a level of talent. I'm talking about a level of respect.
A level of respect. That's exactly what it is.
I remember when a couple years ago you sang at Singing in the Sun for the first time, and Jim Brady called me a few weeks after that, and he said, I just have to tell this to somebody or something like some. He said, I know you know Jimmy, and he said, in fact, he did a song you guys wrote and used your name, and he said, I wish you could have seen the entire backstage stop when Jimmy started singing, and I think you were just there with a guitar, and he said, I don't even know how to explain it, but he sat down with a guitar, and I think maybe you just come back from your heart surgery. And the fact that you could even do that, but hold the command of not only the audience, that's a different level of respect.
Yeah, it really is.
Well, it's still something that I don't even understand. I talk about these God things, and I don't even have the words. When I walk into the biggest gift God gave me was my love for people.
Yeah, you can tell that.
It's not even though the music is something that I love dearly, and
it's a great gift.
It is a great gift. But my gift for musicianship and things like that it's minor compared to a lot of people. But God gave me, I think, He gave me a love for people and a voice. I think He gave me a voice. I always tried to be somebody else. I always tried to sing like somebody else when I was young, and I never could. And it made me mad. I got upset because I was like, man, I'm never gonna make it. If I can't sing like so and so, I am never gonna do anything.
Crazy.
And so I wound up doing it. Singing no matter what.
That's crazy.
It didn't matter whether I could make it or not. I wasn't striving for that. I was just doing something I loved. I said, well, I love this, so I'm going to do it. And
great. And you talk about your love for people, and I remember several years ago you were at some little venue in like Lebanon, Tennessee or something, and Daly and Vincent were there, and I went with you, and I was standing backstage, and it's the first time it really hit me that your love for people is so authentic that I stand there and go, I'm his next door neighbor. But by the time you got done with your first song, everybody in that room felt like they were your next door neighbor. Yeah. And it is a God thing, but it's a love, and it's an authentic level of communication that when these singers only are worried about what stage they're going to be on next, they'll never understand or appreciate what I saw and I've seen every time since that I've been blessed to watch you.
Well, here lately we've had, like a lot of World War II veterans come to our show. I had a couple weeks ago, we had one that was 104 years old. We had two.
Were you there, Dusty?
Maybe.
Sorry.
And one was two of them were there in Texas. We were down there. One was 101 and one was 102.
Wow.
And the one that was 104, the first one I met, he held onto my hand and he said, "I got to tell you, I love you." And I said, I said, "What?" He said, "No, I just want to tell you that I love you." He said, "Because I just feel something from you that I don't feel from other artists." And I just hugged on him and I said, "You know what?" I said, "It's just God had placed a love in my heart for people that I can't even understand.
Yeah.
And even though I don't know somebody's personal story, I hear a lot of personal stories. I hear about people losing loved ones, and I hear about people that are going through hardships.
Yeah.
And sometimes all they want is just a hug, an
So
acknowledgement.
true. Man, that's
just
true, Jimmy.
acknowledgement of, hey,
which is so much bigger than the music.
right. It's a lot bigger. This is a lot bigger than
But the music draws them, and that's what I think. That's the calling card.
But the music is as authentic as
you're exactly.
So when you write songs like "More Than a Name on a Wall" or and some of the other patriotic things, you've had old veterans come up and given you their Bronze Star or something that they just need to do something.
Wow!
And you've held that with such a great level of
they've given me
respect.
Purple Hearts. They've given me just every kind of imaginable. Award that you can imagine. They just pour them out to me.
Because they feel like you get them.
And he cares.
Yeah. And just one man, he was 85 years old. He came up and he handed me, he said, he was crying and he said, couldn't hardly talk. He said, I want you to have this. And it was a Navy SEAL emblem. And I took it and I took it from him and I'm going to stick this on my strap. And I had this one guy come up and it was a Navy SEAL and he said, you got to take that off there. You can't wear that. And he got really upset with me. I said, oh, he said, because this is such an, he said, when he gave you this, he should have told you this. But I said, he couldn't even talk.
Yeah.
And I said, he said, I know why, but he said, you really can't do that. You're not a Navy SEAL.
Wow.
And I just brought it home and I put it in a special place.
Which is so cool.
We were in D.C. last year. And in fact, one of those cool, I get to live next to Jimmy Fortune stories is he was going to play at the Kennedy Center last 4th of July, 3rd. And he said, hey, do you want to play mandolin behind me? Well,
okay.
Heck yes. I don't play the mandolin, but I will learn how. And there I stood on the stage of the Kennedy Center. But so 4th of July, we walked down to the mall to watch the big fireworks show.
Yes.
And on the way, we passed the wall with all the names etched in it. And I said, hey, take me to the spot where you were standing when the idea hit for more. And he did. You went to the exact spot, told me the story, and stood there and sung it. And I'm looking around going, I'm the luckiest guy in the world.
Yeah.
I'm watching this right up close. And I do have it on my phone of him singing it.
Oh my gosh!
So, yes, I know a lot of stories about you.
Yeah, well, I'm one of the most blessed people in the world. I got somebody like Dave Clark in my life. Yeah. I mean, when this is a God thing, big time, because when the Statler Brothers retired, actually before they retired, I knew they were about a year before they retired. They were, and Nina and I talked about maybe moving to Nashville. And we talked to this real estate lady, and she said, well, we'll go look at some stuff when y'all come down sometime. And so we went out. The first day, we went riding with this lady. She came right over here and brought right down this driveway right here, came by this house. And we looked at this house, and we were like, oh, I like that. I like that. Oh, it's just something about it. Well, we got an appointment to come look at it, and we came in. And we walked in that door right there, and we looked around, and we were like, man, I really like this house, And so we knew we weren't going to really buy right now, but we just saw it. And so we went back home, and we looked at other houses. Yeah. We started looking at other places, but went back home. And then when the Statler Brothers retired, we thought, well, we better go back and start looking. So Nina came back by herself, and I was on the road. She looked at 60 some houses around, and she kept saying I didn't see anything that I really liked. And then so when I was down here another time, we found another house over here that we kind of liked. It was about 10 miles from here, and I actually put a contract. I told them we wanted it, and we hadn't come back to this place yet. And then so when I told them what we'd pay, and which was the full price, they came back with another thing saying, no, we want
Wow.
$10,000 more.
Wow.
Than I said, well, okay, we're not going to do it. So we talked. We called this lady up and said, that house we looked at, that first one, can we go back? And we can't. There was no sign in the yard. It wasn't for sale then. So I said, well, why don't you walk up there and just see if they'd sell it? She walked up, knocked on the door, and they came. And they said, yeah, we'll sell it.
No.
And this is the house. This is the house we've been in for 21 years. And it was the first one, the very first one
that you driven by and you liked.
Right. And I saw that stuff grown up out here was kind of grown up, and on each side of the house was really grown up. And so I got in there and I started cleaning it out, and I started pulling bushes out. So I launched a war on that creek bank out there, and I said, I'm going to start cleaning that up. And I started cleaning that out, and eventually got to see my neighbor on the other side.
That's so funny.
Started cleaning it up and cleaning it out, and there's nothing out there between us now. But
I know.
And
except a bridge.
Except a bridge that Dave and I built with our two sons, with me with Chris and Dave with his son Sam. We built that bridge we call the COVID Bridge.
Was it during COVID time?
During COVID, yeah.
That's so cool.
I went up there.
That is so cool.
And, Cindy would always say, we need a bridge between our house. She said, I would love to have a bridge.
That's so sweet.
And I said, you know what? I'm going to make that happen.
During COVID, we staged a, let's try to be funny, picture of us co-writing with social distancing.
Yeah.
So we've got pictures of him on his side of the creek and me on
you
mine.
On your other side, what?
And at some point, instead of writing a bridge, we just built it.
That's
and,
it.
Well, we didn't write the bridge. We said
we built it.
Yeah.
But
wow.
So about 10 years ago, we started talking about you wanted to tell your story in a book, and about 8 years ago, you said, do you want to write it? And it took me all of about 30 seconds to say yes. I'd never written on a biography like that, but that led to more evenings than I could count at this table or upstairs in your music room. We drove to Virginia because I wanted to see Nelson County, and I got to. We went to a Walton's cast reunion because Nelson County is where the Earl Hamner Jr., the creator of the Waltons, is from. We got to go up and like you talk about, I'm standing going, how did I get here? I'm standing in those meetings and wondering how I got here. And we don't do a lot of commercials on this podcast, but in June, in a few weeks, that book will be out.
Coming out. It is, and it's called Story of an American Dreamer.
Which
and,
I just love the title of it. Man, I love the title.
I knew going into this that it's like I keep saying, it's the biggest God thing in the world. When you look back at it, I knew I had to have somebody with the biggest heart that I knew in this world, and it's that man sitting right there, Dave Clark. He's got the biggest heart, and I know everybody that knows him. He's got a lot of nonsense about him.
Oh yeah, and he's old.
But if I could ever think of somebody that would be the person to do, I moved in next door. Think about it, 21 years ago. The only man that could help me write this book.
Look at the God's hand. The tapestry that he does.
But the book could have been out probably in a year. But his story was still unfolding, and it was like, you know what? We're in no hurry. There was never a time limit, and there, even technically, it was probably done a couple of years ago, and then something happened. They were going to build a statue.
A statue came. Yep. I just couldn't believe it. But I had a friend of mine that I love dearly, Lyndon and Peggy Cook from in Utah. He came to me one day and he said he had gone to the museum, the Country Music Hall of Fame, and he saw the plaque in there, and he said, I said that's a nice plaque, but he said, I think you need something a lot better than that. And I'm like, well, what do you mean? What are you talking about? He said, how would you like to have a statue in your hometown? I said, I don't know, Lyndon. I don't know about that. I'm not a statue person. I don't know if I've ever done anything to deserve a statue. And he said, well, I do. And so he started the process of, at first I said, I'm a good friends with Earl Hamner, who's the writer, creator of the Waltons. And and he passed away a few years ago. And I said, Lyndon, I said, look, he said, I knew Earl Hamner. And I said, he never really, to me, got the attention he deserved about a lot of things. I said, if you would do a statue for him and put it in our hometown, I would be really happy. If you could do that, you could get that done. He said, well, I can get that done, but he said, I'm also going to do one for you too. So he did both.
Wow.
It's how high, 9 foot or something?
9 foot tall.
I've seen I think you had a picture of it.
Yeah.
Wow.
And I could not believe it, but Lyndon and Peggy, they had it commissioned. There's a lot you have to go through. I didn't realize. I just say you need to just like doing a statue, put it up with somebody. You have to get it commissioned, and you have to have a certain amount of things that have happened in your life to have something like that done. And
he said that was the only statue he'd ever done for somebody that was still alive. Is that right?
Right.
Wow.
And so
and my favorite part of that is they did like a 2 foot.
Oh, it was like a 2.5 foot bronze of me, 2 of them, and one of them's in the Hall of Fame, and I have one of them here at the house that are bronze.
And they're like little
tiny.
And you know how they have like
so it's life size.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
No,
I'm like, which one's life size?
I'm just joking.
But he carried it around the back of his car for a while, which is just funny.
Is so crazy.
I tried to get you to put it out by the mailbox.
Yeah.
Like,
that's what true artists do, though. They don't realize. I mean, that's. Did your mom and dad get to see some of this?
They got to see me with the Statler Brothers.
Okay, they did.
You'll have to buy a copy of the book.
I will.
I'm
so excited about that. So they did get to see.
But all those stories are in there. This book, what makes it to me, what's going to take it to where it needs to be is that it's not so much about me as it is about the people that have put me where I'm at, and about God's,
which I love.
and it goes all the way back to 1921. So it covers about a whole century of, over a century of things that happened that are still affecting me today, which was my mother being born in 1921 and her mother passing away from blood poison. She was 2 weeks old, whatever. Oh, wow. And this lady coming from Nashville, Tennessee to help my grandfather raise my mother and 2 other siblings. And her name was Mrs. Grills, and she read the Bible to my mother, taught my mother about how was to pray, taught my mother about, led my mother to Christ through telling her what she had to do to open her heart and invite Christ into her heart, and how important it was going to be in her life, and how my mother took that initiative in her life and prayed, was a prayer warrior in so many ways, and raised 9 kids. Yeah. And my father, who was an alcoholic, who was, if there was ever anybody prayed into heaven, it was my daddy. And I saw what God did in his life through my mother's prayers. And still to this day, I've got recordings of my mama praying. And it's if there's ever anybody pouring their heart out to God, when you hear it, you go, my gosh, she's sitting at the foot of the throne.
There are so many little sad stories, like you talk about your dad and your mom prayed him to the altar, and so there was a young evangelist that came to the little Baptist church in Nelson County, preached a revival, and his dad said, you know what, I've tried everything else, I'm going to try this, and went to the altar that night, and life changed at the Fortune House. But you know who that evangelist was?
Jerry Falwell.
Young preacher named Jerry. There's those kind of stories that you just...
And later on in life, way down the road, after the Statler Brothers, and I had talked to Jerry Falwell on the phone. I called him for some advice one day, and I asked him, and he remembered my dad.
Isn't that amazing?
I got chilled myself.
He remembered. And this was a little teeny little church back in 1967.
So my favorite chapter title in the book Do you know what that would be? We haven't talked about this.
Your favorite? I don't.
The chapter title.
Title.
The name of the chapter is "Mama Led Me to the Lord." Bill Gaither led me to Cracker Barrel.
That is, and that is true.
That's a great story.
Yeah.
But
that's
what's happened when the book comes out. You also did a DVD with Gaither's and a CD.
DVD and a CD. I was at Ricky Skaggs' studio, and Ricky and Sharon Skaggs actually did the interview for this video. And these are it's called Songs of an American Dreamer.
Yeah.
And so these are songs like Elizabeth, More Than a Name on a Wall, Too Much on My Heart, My Only Love, and then I Believe.
it's one of my favorite songs.
And so
it's a great song.
they are, and the stories behind the songs, and it's just a kind of a mini series of the book.
Yeah.
I guess you would say, and it also talks about in there. We end it with talking about my son, which passed away back in October last year, Jimmy, which has been a really tough time, and it's just something that but you try to come to grips with. Someone asked me the other day because I hear so many people that lose children, and so many times they are angry with God, and I get asked, well, aren't you angry with God? And I said, no, I'm not angry with God. I can only be thankful. I can only be thankful for the time that I had with my son, and I had him for 51 years. Some people don't have their children anytime. And he was born with spinal bifida, and he went through a lot. But he was an inspiration. I used to think that he lived his life through me, but I found out that I lived my life through him. And he just had a wonderful outlook on life. He never complained. He had nothing in life. He had, he just went through so much pain in his life and everything, but he still had a desire to live and love life and love people, love the Lord. He loved everything. I mean, never complained, never. And I've complained about a hangnail, and I complain about that, and he would never complain about anything. And so I when I first got the call, or I called and they told me that he'd passed away, got pneumonia, October the 15th last year, and passed away that evening. I called up there and they said, Mr. Fortune, we started to tell you that your son just passed away. And when they said that, I lost it. I mean, I was totally distraught. I mean, I don't even know. I remember being upstairs. My granddaughter, Cora, happened to be here that evening with me. And she just has this connection with Jesus that I don't even know how to explain it. She can quote Bible stories. She loves the Lord. She says, when I grow up, Papa, I want to sing, but I want to sing for God. I don't want to do anything else. I want to sing for God. That's it. That's the kind of outlook she has on life. She loves Jesus.
She's how old?
7. Absolutely. I mean, she can open the Bible up. She wants to read her Bible. She'll tell you stories and just right out of the Bible. She can tell you everything. I mean, it's just blows my mind. Yeah. She happened to be here that day. And I was just laying in the floor in there, just lost it. I was just laying and crying and uncontrollably. And she ran over to me and said, Papa, put my face in her hands. And she looked at me and she said, Papa, he's not dead. He's with Jesus. And when she said that, out of the mouths of babes, I felt this calmness come over me. And I said, you're right, Cora.
Yeah.
You're right. And I had a peace, But it took that little baby to tell me that, and pull me out of it. And I've had a peace about it. That I know
So
where
powerful.
Jimmy was a believer, and with the things that he went through in life, and the fact that he would every morning, he couldn't get out and do anything. He was pretty much tethered to this rehabilitation center that he was in. But every morning he would get on there and he would say, "Good morning, everybody. I love you."
And it was real.
Everybody. And he had 4,500, which was the maximum friends that you could have. 4,500 from a wheelchair sitting in a, and people loved him, and people,
That's ministry.
And
yeah.
And Jimmy, that he didn't come by that by accident either. And
I don't think Cora did either.
yeah. Now Cora's a mess. She's my buddy.
I mean, that's that. You think about that.
This has been amazing, and we could go on for a couple more hours, but I just want to say thank you. And the greatest honor of my life is just getting to hang with somebody like you. And
again,
I'm a bigger fan now than when you moved in.
Dustin, Dave, Cindy. Thank you so much.
We love Cindy.
Cindy's behind the scenes here, but she makes everything run. She's Dave's Nina.
Yeah.
And,
Yes.
I have a Nina,
She's
which
amazing,
another God thing in my life that I look at and go, I knew how to write a song maybe and sing a little bit and play guitar a little bit. She knew how to do everything else. If it wasn't for
And she's
Nina,
still learning.
yeah. And if it wasn't for her, even though she has to crack the whip, I am the child she never wanted.
Yes.
That's funny.
And
This has been awesome.
She has a lot to put up with, but God has put all of y'all in my life.
Well,
I love your
feel that
heart.
too.
I love your heart, man.
And this is why
we love to tell the story.
Thank you so much, Jimmy,
Yeah, Jimmy.
for doing
I
this.
love you guys.
We love you.
God bless you.